Good day. My name is Rebecca Stainer and I'm with Generations, and I'm a member of our Quality Excellence, Clinical Excellence, Compliance, and Infrastructure team. And I'm very excited to share with you some information about the COVID-19 vaccine. All right, we're at the beginning of this process, so there are a lot of questions that we commonly hear. There usually are, how do we know it's safe and effective? What kind of technology is being used for the vaccine? What is an EUA? How long will it work? Will I feel sick? What if I've already had COVID? Does the vaccine use virus? And will I still have to wear a mask? And so we hope to answer all those and more now. So what to know about the vaccine? There are several in development, but the two that have been authorized, and we would use one of these on our campus at our vaccine clinics, are Pfizer and Moderna. They're both 2 doses. Their design is very, very similar, and their results were very similar. So they're fairly interchangeable as far as we're concerned for the information about them. They do not contain the virus. A lot of traditional vaccines contain a piece of the virus or a piece of inactivated virus so that they give our bodies something to react to so that we build protections. The design of this is different. It's an mRNA vaccine, and mRNA is messenger RNA. Our cells are full of oodles of mRNA, and their job is to make proteins. So the technique of mRNA, this technology has been around since the 90s, and it's been used in cancer therapies for more than 10 years. There have been mRNA vaccines that they've tried to make for specifically like flu and Zika. They just weren't very effective, and so that's why you haven't heard of them. And the design is to inject ourselves with a little bit of mRNA, and it's packed tight into a lipid nanoparticle, and it tells our cells to make a protein, just a harmless protein, and the cells do it, and then they stick it on the surface, and that's really where this works, is that your system is policing for things that don't belong there, and it will see this protein and think, what is this? Why is this here? And it will shut that cell down, and it will build up antibodies to do it. And then it will tell the lymphatic system, watch for this protein. This wasn't invited to our party. And if it shows up again, let us know. So this design really is using your body to do what your body already does. And the point being that this protein that the mRNA vaccine asks our body to make is on the outside of the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. So in future, if you've had the vaccine and you are exposed to coronavirus again, it will recognize that protein, know what to do, and it's watching for it. Can the mRNA vaccine give me COVID-19? No, there's no virus in the vaccine, so it's not capable of giving you COVID-19. And then can the mRNA vaccine change my DNA? This is such a good question, because anytime you see acronyms like RNA, DNA, yada, yada, that's exactly where all of our minds go. The mRNA is terribly fragile. It's one of the reasons it needs to be kept so cold. When it gets injected into our cells, it delivers its instruction and then it breaks down, and very shortly after is completely undetectable. It's not capable of getting into the nucleus of our cells, and so it can't touch or interact with our DNA. All right, what is an EUA? This is the FDA's approach to authorizing something important and necessary during a public health crisis. This really stems from, in 1981, the US really saw the impact of the AIDS HIV epidemic. And it wasn't until the late 90s when the FDA approved a treatment. And even the FDA felt like their regular methods of going through their procedures was just completely inappropriate for this crisis moment. 2 decades was too long. And so the FDA set up a formalized approach when they need to accelerate things. And it doesn't mean that any steps were skipped. And it doesn't mean that the vaccine was done too quickly or that it isn't safe. There are a number of processes that the FDA does and at various phases that they require. And for example, some of the vaccines in production now, the FDA went back and told them to do larger trials. So some of them are in development and we just won't hear about them until later spring of 2021. But the FDA really does have a vigorous set of standards that they've used for decades. For example, the visual here is the typical FDA process where we have research and development in the front. Phase 1 is a very small group of very healthy people that they do initial tests on. Phase 2 is hundreds of people with various aspects to see, to dial in the dosage for a variety of individuals. And then phase 3 are those big clinical trials where they're really testing the effectiveness against whatever they're trying to do for a huge group of people with some diversity. And then after that, the FDA would license and approve it, manufacturing would start, and then distribution. And this can take 10 years. An accelerated vaccine process for an EUA, in the case of Pfizer and Moderna, you saw the research and development and phase 1, they overlapped. Phase 2 and phase 3 had overlap, and manufacturing started as phase 2 and 3 were starting, which is an incredible risk. And that kind of financial impact on a pharmacy or a company, should it not have worked, could have put them out of business. But in this case, they were so sure of the science of this that they took the gamble and started manufacturing even before the FDA had the ability to review it because the clinical trials hadn't finished. But as you can see from this, these steps weren't skipped, they were simply overlapped, and some of them happened simultaneously. So who was in the vaccine trials? This is the part we were very excited about. Between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, there were more than 70,000 people. And not only that, but they really focused on diversity. They were tested from 16 and up, and they really focused on that 55 and up and 75 and up group that is so important to us because these are the people that are so impacted by this. In addition, they really focused on diversity. They wanted different ethnicities and races. They focused on people with different levels of medical condition. A lot of what we in the clinical world sometimes call comorbidities. They focused on, they had people with diabetes, obesity, active cancer, cardiovascular disease, liver disease. And it was really meant to get a lot of questions answered very quickly over a diverse number of people. Typical trials usually have 3,000 to 5,000 people. And again, between these two, it was 70,000. And are they effective? Oh boy, yeah. So the flu vaccine is about 44% effective. If you've ever had the shot and then gotten the flu later, you're probably a little ticked off. They work as hard as they can, and it's always worth getting. But and then the chickenpox vaccine, it's about 70% effective. Polio and measles are way up there with 99 and 97%. We've really been able to dial those in over the years. And the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were 94.1 to 95% effective. And that really held true over various ages, at various medical conditions, various racial and ethnic diversity, and various genders. So we were really excited to have a tool like this to use. And days to effectiveness, such a good question. How quickly will this work? So if you look at the chart here, the red line going up is the placebo group. This is the group that didn't get the vaccine and just got a saline shot. So they're our control group. The blue line going across the bottom is the vaccine group that did get the vaccine. And the numbers at the bottom are the number of days from getting the first dose. And what you see is about day 10 to 14, the rates of COVID in the vaccine group start to flatline, which is an incredible indication that resistance actually starts to build up very shortly after the very first dose. However, the vaccine is about putting long-term and strong protections in place. So it really is not until the required second dose and about 1 to 2 weeks after that second dose where protection is in place and where you are considered vaccinated. What to expect for side effects. A lot of us got vaccines as kids and we do not remember it. Those of us who have traveled will remember getting vaccines probably more recently and feeling a little ugh. So like any vaccine, there's a chance you're going to feel something. Side effects they really are okay. They're just an indication that the vaccine is doing its job and your body is building up antibodies. Many people will feel no side effects whatsoever, and the vaccine is working just fine. The most of those people who felt really no side effects, pain at the injection site would be the exception. That was fairly common. About, by and large, more than 70% of people felt pain at the injection site. But again, it's a shot. The likely side effects are mild to moderate. And essentially in all cases, and they were really short term. The side effects started usually about a day after the dose, and they usually lasted just a day, maybe 2 days. Pain at the injection site might have lasted a little bit longer. And we were very excited to see that older adults, 55 and up, really experienced far fewer side effects. So the side effects, what they might be, is one or more of the following. Pain at the injection site, the most common. Fatigue, muscle ache, headache, chills, fever, or joint pain. These are the ones where you might have a little bit of one of these or more. Vomiting and diarrhea, not a side effect. And no one had any serious adverse effects. In no case was anyone required to go to the hospital because of a side effect after getting an injection. And we are really careful about our screening these days. Before somebody were to start a shift, if they came in and they had muscle aches and a headache, we would not let them in to start their day. Or if somebody was coming into the dining room and had chills and fatigue, that would be a red flag, and we would probably send their meal to their room. But we will be thoughtful. We know that within 72 hours of each dose, there's a likelihood that there may be some side effects. So we'll be thoughtful in our approach for this for our screening. And a side effect is not that you'll test positive for COVID-19. Because there's no virus or piece of virus in this, it's just not capable of giving you COVID-19. All right, what to expect for side effects 18 to 55. So in this, you will see dose 1 on the left and dose 2 on the right. And these are the side effects that you may experience. We have fever, fatigue, muscle ache, headache, chills, joint pain, and pain at the injection site. And pain at the injection site, by far the most. We have mild, moderate, severe. And as far as mild, moderate, 31% of people experienced that. Fever was really low for the first dose. You'll see that in the first dose, we have a lot of 2%, 3%, 4%, 6%, 7%. These are really rather low. Dose 2, you can see that those creep up. You see more 7, 9, 10, 15. There's a 23%. Again, this was a clinical trial in which they were asking, what do you feel? Do you feel side effects? What are they? How bad are they? There's a lot of us that may have a headache and we really just barely notice it until somebody asks us if we have a headache. And then we think, yeah, I have a moderate headache. Now it bothers me. So, doctors really do look at this and know that we are prodding people to, what do you feel? Do you feel anything? So in most cases, all of this could be managed with Tylenol and ibuprofen, and you'll be right as rain. But, and you do see a few that are severe. This really, the term severe sounds scary. Really, this means is it disrupted their daily activities. It was bad enough that it took them down for the count for a little bit and they napped all day, that kind of thing. All right, what to expect for 55 and greater. Dose 1 on the dose 2 on the right. And these numbers, as you can see, are far smaller. You see a lot more just nothing entries. For dose 1, you see a lot of 1%. The highest was mild fatigue at 7%. And then, of course, pain at the injection site is by far the most common. Not the majority, but by far the most common of any of the possible side effects. And then dose 2, you see those numbers creep up a little bit more. You see 7, 9, 10, 15, 20, about 20% had after dose 2 moderate fatigue. Again, by and large, all of these can be well managed with ibuprofen or Tylenol. All right, how long and when will it work? As we saw in that chart, it's really about 10 to 14 days after that first dose that you start to build resistance and protection start. But it really is that second dose that retests the systems, make sure that antibodies were in place, make sure that the lymphatic system got the message to be policing for this protein that is on the coronavirus. So it's really not until about 1 to 2 weeks after the second dose that you're considered vaccinated and those longer term protections are in place. We really don't know how long it will last. We've had phase 3 clinical trials since July for both Moderna and Pfizer, and to date, they have continued to be effective and haven't decreased in effectiveness. But time will tell how long and whether we'll have boosters down the road, perhaps. What we do know right now is that it's 94.1 to 95% effective, and that's pretty phenomenal. And what if I've already had COVID? This is a handful of us. And of course, if somebody actively has COVID or they're actively in quarantine or they have a fever, we would not want them to get vaccinated now. And that's not because it would hurt them. It is really about protecting the people that are doing the vaccinations. They are touching thousands of shoulders, and we need to know that they don't have exposure risk. The vaccine, however, is highly recommended, even if somebody has had COVID. When you've had COVID, your body built up antibodies and hopefully told the lymphatic system to be policing for this virus. However, it was under duress. Your body was sick when this happened. The vaccine has the advantage of you're in a healthy moment, and it's these systems are also being triggered in this same way. So it's about building up the longer term protection, the more sure protection. Post-COVID, you probably had 90 days of resistance. And that was only if you saw coronavirus again and your system responded fast enough and well enough to deal with it so you didn't get a reinfection. But that resistance really, we saw a decrease of that after 90 days. So definitely recommended, even if you've had COVID. Will I still need to wear a mask? As you can see from the photo we picked, yes. For the time being, we're going to keep most of our COVID-19 precautions in place. This is really about getting the transmission rates down in the society around us. We will need, as far as like the herd immunity theory, that's really counting on about 70 to 80% of people having resistance, having had the vaccine in order to really see those transmission rates drop. And there are a lot of people that may not be able to get the vaccine right away, or they may not be able for a medical condition to get the vaccine. And we need to wait it out until all of us are in a safer environment. Additionally, the clinical trials were really focused on, does this protect you from getting COVID? It wasn't really focused on, does this protect you from giving COVID? So logically, if you've been vaccinated, in the future, your system might encounter the coronavirus that causes COVID. and you will be successfully fighting it and shutting it down. However, you have the coronavirus in your system as you do so, and logically, you could be infectious. And there is certainly a concern that somebody that has the vaccine is suddenly like, I'm immune, yay. It's just not the case. We don't know how infectious you may be as you run into a coronavirus and fight it. We want those transmission levels to drop so that we're just not running into it anymore, and your body doesn't have to fight it because it's not all around you. Additionally, we talked about how effective it is, that 94.1 to 95%, which is phenomenal. But what about that 5%, right? What they found is that the vaccine is essentially 100% effective against a severe COVID outcome. And for 94.1 and 95%, they're not going to get COVID. But there is that possibility, that rare possibility that a small group of people, even vaccinated, could get COVID. The advantage is symptoms that they get will be far less. There will not be a severe outcome for them, and their body will be able to fight through it. But that is the 5%. And there is the fact that as you're fighting it, you could be infectious to other people. So the 6 feet of distance and the being careful about gatherings, being careful about masks, all of that will be part of our strategy until we're through this pandemic. And is it safe? This is the FDA's primary objective is, does this exist for a reason? Do we need this vaccine? And is it safe? And, we looked at the phases that were allowed to be overlapped in this case, but they really weren't skipped. And one of the most important phases in the FDA's process is they have 2 independent advisory panels look at the data and make their recommendations to the FDA. And in these panels are globally recognized vaccine experts, immune system experts, and infectious disease experts. These are not people associated with the manufacturers of the vaccines. These are people in the academic branches of our science. And they will give their recommendations to the FDA, whether they would vote for it or not. And then the FDA stews on that information along with their own review of all of the data. And then they recommend or authorize it for this group under this circumstances, for this age, et cetera, et cetera. And what really is tremendous about this is how transparent Pfizer and Moderna have been. Normally, there's a lot of trade secrets in this kind of clinical trial data and research and development, and they keep it much closer to the chest. In this case, they have given the FDA just far more than they ever possibly could have wanted about the clinical trials, about how it was developed, about the research and development information and data. So, a lot of these processes were unusual, but they happened the right way. The science really took as long as the science needed in this case. Is it safe? It will not cause you to test positive for COVID tests. The COVID tests that we do are looking to see if you have an active COVID-19 case. They're not looking to see if you have antibodies. There are tests like that exist because people want to know maybe in the past if they had COVID. So they want to see if maybe they have antibodies. In that case, you would come up positive for that test because the vaccine's whole purpose is to get you antibodies. But you won't test positive for COVID-19 because you do not have the virus causing an active case of COVID-19. There isn't any egg component to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Again, there are several in development and they're all different. So specific to the 2 that we will use, this is not an element of concern, but there are people that have allergies to other vaccines because the vaccines do have egg components. So if you choose not to get vaccinated at one of our clinics, this would be something to check on later to see which vaccine it was and whether this was a concern. There may be medical reasons in which somebody would have a contraindication or a caution for getting the vaccine. For example, there are some people that have a medical history of severe response to vaccines. There were people like that in the clinical trials. And in the UK, there were 2 individuals that within about 10 minutes of getting the first dose had an anaphylactic-like response. They were both immediately treated with epinephrine or adrenaline, and they were fine. And to date, the CDC says that in the United States, 1 million people have been vaccinated. And to date, also, we've seen 2 cases. They were both in Alaska. They were both with the Pfizer vaccine, where they also had an anaphylactic response within about 10 minutes of getting the vaccine. They were both treated and they're both fine. This is one of the reasons that when people get vaccinated, we're going to have everybody just sit down for 15 minutes and the clinicians will watch them to make sure that they're okay. Anyone with a medical history of reaction, we would have them sit down for 30 so that we felt really sure. There are other cautions that may be out there. For example, pregnant and breastfeeding individuals. There were about between the 2 trials, 30 individuals that were pregnant. And while we have from July 6 months of data that tells us that there were no vaccine-related adverse effects, it wasn't that big a sample size, and we certainly would want a little bit more time to watch pregnant individuals. We do know that in the animal trials, there weren't any reports of impact on the embryo or fetal development, so that is certainly reassuring. And for the risk-benefit way out, we do know that pregnant individuals, should they get COVID, they are at increased risk of severe outcome. So definitely something to have a conversation with about your healthcare provider who knows you, knows your condition, your health, the location you're in, and can help you really assess your personal risk. Additionally, there are certain age groups that this is specifically recommended for. Pfizer is 16 and up, and Moderna is 18 and up. And that's really because the trials for both cases were 16 and up. So that's the data that they have. There's not reason to think it wouldn't be safe and effective in younger individuals. We just don't have that sample yet, though that is certainly coming. And there were about 8 cases of Bell's palsy reported in the clinical trials. There were 4 in Pfizer, and they were in the vaccine group. There were 4 in Moderna, 3 of which were in the vaccine group, and 1 was in the placebo group. Bell's palsy in general is a temporary facial paralysis. It causes a little bit of drooping on one side. It's temporary. And while there were 8 cases between the more than 70,000 individuals in the clinical trials, there wasn't any evidence that it was vaccine related. The FDA thinks it's medically interesting. It's certainly something to watch for, but it wasn't really a caution. It was just something that was interesting and they're on the lookout for. There are individuals also that have what might be a personal moral objection to vaccines. There is a history of vaccine development that includes growth of vaccines in cells, and these cells may have come from fetal tissue. So every vaccine is different. Every vaccine currently in development for COVID is different, but the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, these are mRNA vaccines. They're developed from a template of instruction. They're packed in a lipid nanoparticle. These were not grown in cells. So fetal tissue was not used in the development or production of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. If this is a personal caution that you may have and you choose not to get vaccinated in our upcoming clinics, but do get vaccinated later, you would want to find out which vaccine type it was and find out if that was the case specifically for that vaccine. But generally for safety overall, Dr. Anthony Fauci says that in the history of vaccines, 90% of what we know of any long-term effect, we know in the first 30 to 40 days. We're fortunate to have all of this very transparent data from the clinical trials. So, this really is quite exciting to feel that this is safe, this is effective, because this is the data that we have. However, for individuals with specific medical conditions, That's a conversation to have with your healthcare provider specific to you. Lastly, will we monitor for side effects? Absolutely, we will monitor for side effects. We know what the side effects are. We know that they're expected and predicted. We know that they're expected to be mild and moderate by and large. So we'll be watching for this, and we will ask all staff to self-report. How is it developed so fast? This is one of the reasons a lot of people have concerns about the vaccine. We went through how the processes for the FDA authorization had a lot of things happen simultaneously that gave us some speed. But this really was a global effort. This is a phenomenal and unique thing to have government agencies, nonprofits, pharmacies, companies, and the leading scientists across the world all focused on a single objective: to get the achievement of a vaccine. And additionally, there was unlimited resources put toward this: technology and manpower and knowledge, and money. The US alone has put in upwards to this point of more than $18 billion to help get us to a vaccine. And the world made it its highest priority. So the collaboration efforts from peer agencies and companies was really fairly phenomenal. Also, there was existing research. We've had 17 years of research on similar coronaviruses. MERS and SARS are both coronaviruses and have been around and have been the focus of a great deal of study. In addition, the mRNA technology has been around since the 90s. We've been using this in therapies for cancer for a decade. And they have been trying to make vaccines with it. They really nailed it this time. Before they weren't really effective. Usually the envelope that's delivering the mRNA would fall apart and then the immune system would just whatever. In this case, they really figured it out, and the mRNA design has been so successful this time, and it was scalable. They could do it quickly. This probably is a huge part of our future of vaccines. Additionally, we had a huge pool of volunteers for our clinical trials. It answered a lot of questions really quickly for us, and all of these added speed for this vaccine. Why should I get vaccinated? For me personally, our whole business model at our communities is to bring people together in a communal environment, intergenerational, so that rich with amenities and engagement opportunities, so people can thrive to the best of their ability. And this has been turned on its head. We've been asked to stand back and not give hugs, and not to gather in the same way. And we really are a culture that thrives on that. I want to get back there, and so I am personally so excited to be able to bring our communities together again, because they're healthy and able to celebrate the end of a pandemic. But as far as why should you get vaccinated, there's a chart at the bottom of this table here, and it shows March to December. And if you can't read those numbers, you can still see the way that these new cases really are escalating. We have not hit the peak yet. We have not hit the peak of cases, positivity, hospitals, or our mortality rates. Everywhere around us, COVID cases are escalating. And it's not just the number going up, it's the rapidity with which this is exponentially growing. And ourselves and everyone we love is surrounded by this. What's more is that most transmission is through asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic exposure to individuals who don't know that they have COVID. Asymptomatic being that as an individual who is positive, who never has symptoms, and pre-symptomatic meaning at the time that they actually infected somebody else, it was before they had symptoms and they just didn't know. That leaves us, we're in such a tricky spot as far as trying to protect ourselves and each other. Something like SARS, you were infectious when you had a fever. It was a really good indicator that, oh, I need to be careful, I need to stay home. In this case, you just can't assume that somebody who looks healthy is healthy. And that's just made this a really difficult spot to be in. Um, and the risk level to our residents and anyone immune compromised of any age has been severe. It's just it's completely unfair that the age group of our residents, they're 6% of the cases and 40% of the most severe outcomes. This is something we need to stop. And of course, just to protect you, your loved ones, your coworkers, and residents, but also to set an example. You are members of the healthcare community, you're members of the senior living industry, and people will assume you know more. You're closer to clinicians that can answer questions. You probably have better relationships with a healthcare provider or access to the a medical director of a community. Additionally, we're going first, and this is an incredible opportunity, but it also puts us in the position of being influencers and leaders. We want to share how excited we are to be able to play a role in ending this pandemic and protecting our people, our country, and our communities. Lastly, there's just not going to be an easier time to get vaccinated than our on-site clinics. The federal government's plan was really to get a vaccine, get it approved, get it to the states. And that's where essentially the plan and most of the funding ended. And all of our states are trying to act like little mini FEMAs and figure out deployment, figuring out, okay, here are the recommendations of the federal government and the CDC, who gets it first. This is how many doses we have as of today. Where do we send this? It's incredibly difficult. There's a lot of chaos making around that. And, as we listen to the news, the information just keeps evolving. And part of it is because it's just a tremendous project to effectively do. So we know that we're going to be able to offer the vaccine to our residents and staff at these on-site clinics coming up, but we don't know what it looks like after that. We expect that state and local agencies will provide vaccine. We just don't know what it will look like. So there's really not going to be an easier way or a quicker way to get vaccinated than this pretty awesome opportunity. And that's it. We really, Generations is here to support you, to provide information. We're so excited to be at this moment where this is the first tool we've had in this fight. Everything else has been responsive to this point. This is the first time that we really have a weapon against this virus. Please reach out if you have any questions, concerns, anything that we didn't answer here, or that you need more detail on. Generations has more charts and scientific information than you may ever want to know. So if you haven't had your question answered, we have an answer waiting for you, and I'm really excited for you to ask. But otherwise, thank you for your time. Thank you for being a member of our family, and have a really wonderful holiday.